This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
Hello, Cardinal fans. Welcome to the 11th episode of the St. Louis Cardinals Unrestricted podcast. This is your host, Christian May-Suzuki, and this week we're coming off a little bit better circumstances. It's still not the greatest of times for the St. Louis Cardinals, but look, a sweep in any capacity is a good thing at this point. I know I mentioned earlier that we shouldn't be proud about beating up on teams like the Diamondbacks, like the Pirates, these bottom feeders, in order to really make ourselves a playoff contender or a team that can really do something in the postseason. But right now, with the way the Cardinals are playing, they need some sort of wake-up call or a jolt. And maybe sweeping a team like this, getting a couple of free wins, can be that catalyst and really just wake them up. But unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think that part of the reason that they've struggled is that this is closer to what this team really is at the end of the day. We do have guys like Arenado, like Goldschmidt, who are great assets. But from top to bottom, there are a few guys that you could argue were definitely overperforming. Guys like Edman, who have really started slumping now, and whose OBP, whose walk rate, and whose doesn't really have the pop to put contact in the outfield on a consistent basis. I just think that he has served himself well as a leadoff hitter, and, for a while, I honestly thought that he could take that mantle, but I think the lack of discipline or the inability to draw walks and some of the just lack of general power to put down some of these good base hits, turning these, bloopers into singles, it's something that we kind of have to look at the end of the day. Because he's not a traditional leadoff hitter with the low average, low OBP. And while he has proven to be a pretty decent contact hitter and be able to see the ball, he is still, like I've said, isn't quite at that level yet. And so we need to figure out whether or not he can rise up to that level as a good leadoff hitter, or he should be a lower line of contact hitter, similar to like Colton Wong, who also plays plus defense at a key position. And if that's the case, that's fine. But then we need to understand as a team that the priority is to get someone who can hit leadoff and not just someone who can fill a position. And so I think these are the kind of things that it is important to really discern for the team. And if that takes the rest of the season, if you want to wait until you have a full book worth of volume, then that's fine. Just call it a season. Understand that things have not quite turned out the way that you thought they would, and that you have a window for a little while longer, and accept that and go on to the next year. Make moves to improve for next year and make sure that you can put yourself in a position where in the next couple of years or the next year with this young core, you can put them in the best position where they can develop and grow, and you can put together a competitive team. Now, with that being said, the trade market is starting to heat up a little bit, and another guy that I have harped on for quite a bit was inquired on by the St. Louis Cardinals, and that is Jose Berrios. Now, the big talk around Berrios, to refresh people who aren't really in the loop, is that he is on an expiring deal. Or not an expiring deal, but he has 1 year left of arbitration. And there is no real indication that the Twins and him, or Twins and Berrios, are doing any sort of negotiating. So that means basically that looks like he's on his way out. Looks like he's going to have potentially a year of easy team control before he becomes a free agent, if you can get him this year. And he's a talented young pitcher who has made his way in the AL and whose numbers might not look as good because he's in the AL. But at 27 right now, I really do think that he can be a guy that can be the number 2 next to Flaherty for years to come. Now, yes, as I said, a 4.10 ERA, not the most appealing thing, not something that jumps out and says number 2 starter. But if you watch his stuff, if you watch him pitch, and you look at the stuff he's got, and you consider that he's been in the AL, and he's been on a high offense team that will sometimes just generate more runs on the other end as well, it's something that I'm not particularly concerned about, especially considering the 3.4 ERA this year. And yes, he does have a few blowups, but he is generally a very consistent, very solid pitcher. And yes, pitcher wins don't matter particularly, but I think a 7-2 record shows that he's able to hang on for the majority of his games, and he's able to put together a good performance that puts his team in a good position to win. Now, yes, run support's obviously a big thing. And again, a 3.41 isn't the most appealing stat in the world, but he strikes out at a decent rate, about 9.6 per 9. He only allows about 7 hits. Doesn't really walk anybody, or at least this year hasn't really walked anyone. His whip is at under 1.1. I think that in a park like the Busch Stadium for the Cardinals, I really do think that Berrios can shine and really put up some solid numbers and prove, like I said, that he is a solid number 2 next to Jack Flaherty. Now, the other guy that they were discussing is a former Twins pitcher, now on the Rangers, Kyle Gibson. The Gibson thing is interesting, and I'm not particularly on board for a couple of reasons. The first is that they basically declared that the asking price for Gibson and Berrios is similar. They didn't necessarily outline that directly, but they classified them both as having, quote, high prices. So if we're picking a pitcher to pay a high price for between a 33-year-old on an expiring deal and a 27-year-old on a deal with 1 year arbitration left, I think we know who we're going with here. Now, it's probable, not just possible, but probable, in fact, that Gibson's price is a little bit lower than Berrios. But at the end of the day, I think that the Cardinals need to make another big splash. And they need to make a splash for, like I've said, a guy that in the long term that they can pair with Flaherty for several years to come. Because Carlos Martinez isn't that guy. Obviously, he's probably on his way out, if anything. Wainwright is not pitching past 2022, as he stated, which we'll get to a little later. And there's no one in the minor league organization who has really popped out as a guy who can function as a serviceable number 2 on a playoff contending team. Because look, if we don't have a number 2, then how are you going to win a playoff series if you only have one good starting pitcher? And another team trots out 3+ pitchers. Like there's literally nothing. Wait, what are we going to do against San Diego? Are we just going to Like I don't know what to tell you. If the Cardinals play up against San Diego and they go up against those guys, I mean, I don't even know if they're gonna be able to hit Paddock at this point. It's quite frustrating. And then at that same time, you have guys that could possibly give up 6 runs in the first inning. Like how on earth are you going to be confident in the playoffs when you have such a lopsided pitching matchup? You can't have that. And that's why I think at the end of the day, the Cardinals have made some good trades to put together an offensive core in the Goldschmidt and Arenado. But now it's time to build around that. It's time to bring it together, and it's time to, really make a team and not just be proud of making a few big blockbuster trades like you do in MLB The Show. So, Adam Wainwright. There's been a lot of talk around Adam Wainwright in recent weeks. He has been in the news in good ways for the fact that he is officially going to retire either at the end of this year or next season, but he's not pitching past 2022. And, of course, there's the weird news where he was linked to the Angels coach that put together a lot of special sticky stuff for people. And he apparently got fired for it and then decided to leak texts. And in those texts, there was communication of Adam Wainwright as well as a Venmo payment with a kale and salad emoji, or it was designated it was for kale and salad, which obviously is bullcrap. So we have a situation where Wainwright is put under the radar or put on the microscope for using sticky stuff. And while his performance has been better than you would expect for his age and just the general progression in the last couple of years, especially with the Achilles injury, he was pretty forthcoming and truthful about it and said, I tried it a few times, but I didn't like it, so I switched it up. I didn't do it anymore. And there's obviously no evidence and there's no way to ever prove or disprove that. But I would honestly believe him at this point. I don't think there's any reason not to. And it doesn't seem like there was any further communication that linked him to other guys or that put him in a compromising position. And you see these guys generally, I mean, look at Garrett Cole, who, when asked if he used it, gave this indirect admission that he did. Whereas Adam Wainwright said, yeah, I have nothing to hide. I did this and I didn't like it, and so I didn't do it anymore. And that's the end of it. So I don't think there's any reason to not believe him at this point and to frame him as a cheater for this. But at the same time, you have to see where people come from when you have a guy who's linked to sticky stuff in such a direct manner. It's definitely not something that's good. But look, if the Cardinals were using sticky stuff, if they are using sticky stuff, then they got to get themselves a new manufacturer or something, or they got to figure something else out, because obviously it's not working. We can barely throw strikes here. So like what's going on, guys? How are we using sticky stuff if we just suck? I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it at this point. I mean, ERAs of 5 and 6 in the NL, and unfortunately John Gant, not all of his own fault, is continuing to get bombarded and shelled like on D-Day on the beaches. It's tough for me to believe that the Cardinals are cheating, because if the Cardinals are cheating and they're using sticky stuff for control, they're doing a really, really bad job, because, like I said, it's obviously not working. They're having starts where pitchers are throwing more balls than strikes, and makes me want to pull my hair out. Speaking of that, we've had some decent starts actually from our guys in the last couple of days. Kim looked pretty decent yesterday. His slider, honestly, was as good as I've ever seen it. Usually seems a little flat to me, and his stuff honestly hasn't really blown me out of the water, but it looked a lot better than I expected yesterday. I thought the slider looked a lot sharper than it usually does, and you know what? He didn't do the best job at it, but he threw strikes much better than he usually does. So it's definitely a step up, and yes, it's against the Diamondbacks. It's a team that has struggled to historic levels, but any sort of way to knock this team, get it sort of together and show it how to win. In order to figure this out, they needed a bad team to sort of reconfigure themselves, to reset and to realize, okay, yes, I can pitch 6 innings of 1 out, run baseball. I can go 5 innings without walking 6 guys, 5 guys. I can go 4 innings and throw 60% of my pitches for strikes. And if you got to do that against a bad team in order to start doing it again against the good teams, then so be it. So be it. So back to the Wainwright. Now that we're talking about his retirement finally, I guess I did a little bit of an admission. I've thought that Wainwright should have retired for a couple of years, honestly. It's one of those things where you just don't want to see a player that you really love, that you really, really have idolized and have appreciated for all this time, for his whole career. You want to see him go out with grace. You want to see him go out with the best numbers, and you want to see him be able to be compared with the best of the best. And I was very concerned that he just didn't have the stuff left, the juice to be the Adam Wainwright and go out as the Adam Wainwright that we all know and love and that we all remember, and the Adam Wainwright that he deserves to be remembered as. And you know what? He proved me wrong. He hasn't been Cy Young level, obviously. There's no expecting that. But he has definitely shown that he still has a little juice left. That curveball is still, he can still throw that thing as sharp as an Uncle Charlie ever was. And it's really good to see that for one more year. And if this is it, then I appreciate it's hard to really put into words the appreciation for everything that Wainwright has done, not just in the glory days, but in particular, as I said, at the end of his career here. It's been tough. They haven't really had a particular road to contending for a World Series per se. And Wainwright himself has gone through a lot of adversity, in particular the Achilles injury and just general aging. But he has persevered, and he has held on. And he's really done a good job at keeping this rotation, especially this year, keeping it together at the seams. Because, I mean, Lord knows what would happen to this rotation if he retired and we just didn't have him this year. It would be an especially unfun season, even more unfun than it somehow is now. So Wainwright has really brought a positive vibe to the season, and that's something we should always appreciate him for. And the fact that he's dealing with this, honestly, I would have just got up and gone a long time ago, where he's just said that I'm retiring after this season, because this must be one frustrating year to go through, with just how middling it's been on both ends, how inconsistent it's been on both ends, and then all the fan vitriol coming in, not obviously towards Wainwright, but just generally speaking, the discontent and the just people generally being upset. But, coming off an odd year, a COVID year, I'm sure he wants a little more time to spread his wings, really get out there and play. I mean, at the end of the day, these guys are just guys who love to play baseball. And if he wants to continue to play baseball and he feels he can at that level, then who are we to say no? You know, finally, there's looking toward the future. There's a couple of really, really nice guys that you can look at. And those guys are, unfortunately, not quite ready to come up to the league, but fortunately enough, definitely showing some progress and some really, really, really high ceilings as they move up in the minor league system. You have Gorman, obviously very highly touted prospect, finally moving up into AAA. You have Alec Burleson, who is a recent draft pick that we had. He's been hitting very, very well and just moved up to AA. There are a few guys in the minor leagues. Jordan Walker, who just came back from injury recently and has been tearing the cover off the ball. The window is not a year. It's getting close to a time where they actually have a couple of young guys, a legitimate supporting cast. O'Neill is really starting to round into his own this year, and hopefully will continue to move up, continue to work on his plate approach, continue to draw more walks and strike out less, and maybe not strike out less, strike out a little less, but do a little bit more to improve himself. Bader can serve as hopefully a decent starting center fielder if he can continue to hit the breaking ball better, but at worst a defensive replacement and a guy off the bench. You have a lot of guys who are young, and at the end of the day, they're definitely on the twilight side of their career toward the end, but Arenado and Goldschmidt certainly have more than just a year left. They got quite an amount of time for these guys to really round out into their own and get comfortable in the majors and give the bullpen and give the rotation time to really figure itself out, and give Mozeliak and friends time to figure the rotation out. And, maybe 2-3 years down the line is where that big contending push is. But as the team is right now, there's holes in the rotation. There's evaluation needed at most every position for all these young guys, and whether or not they're really able to fulfill their roles that they're currently fulfilling at a level of a competing team as opposed to just the team that they are right now. And they have a chance to really do something down the road. But they have to look that way, and they have to look forward and not just at their feet. They have to make the moves, like I said, for the Berrioses and not for the Kyle Gibsons. You make the move for the young 27-year-old with team control, not the 33-year-old who's pitching really, really well this year but only has 1 year left on his deal, and a guy that you could just theoretically pick up next year in free agency. These are the kinds of crossroads and the kinds of situations where the Cardinals have to look at themselves and figure out what they really need. And hopefully the decision or the conclusion that they come to is that they really need another young guy that can sustain himself for many years. Because part of the reason that we've had such long-standing success is that there's been a guy who hasn't been necessarily a top-tier player, but there's always been a guy, a serviceable number two, that has been around Wainwright. And we're on the verge of not having that for Jack Flaherty, and it's really shown this year with how much the pitching has struggled without him. And as great as Wainwright has been, it is getting his time, as we've mentioned, and they need another guy. I don't know how much else I can emphasize it. They need another guy, and Jose Berrios is that guy. He really is. He has great stuff. He's got sharp breaking ball, got good fastball. I mean, there's not much else to ask, and the peripherals might not come out to be the greatest in the world at this point, but at the end of the day, I think that he can really come together with a 68% K rate, 74% chase rate. He can really put stuff together in the St. Louis Cardinals rotation as the number 2 guy, and just sitting in Busch Stadium in an NL park and a pitcher's friendly park. I will say, I've said it once and I'll say it again. I think the blockbuster trade, or whatever blockbuster you want to call it, or whatever level you might want to call it, the trade that the Cardinals need to make at the deadline to replace Adam Wainwright, to have a number 2 pitcher for the future, and to really get this rotation back on the right track, is Jose Berrios. So thank you guys so much for listening. I'm sorry this episode's a little bit late, but there's obviously a lot of stuff that's come out recently and was interesting to talk about. Hopefully the Cardinals keep up their momentum, and we will see you next Tuesday. Thank you all so much, and go Cardinals.